morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another episode of Endurance Chat. I'm Marcus Olivari, and joining me today is Austin Zetzman. Good evening, Austin. It's Sunday for you, right?
Yes, Sunday evening fun day, Michael. I am doing well and ready to talk Asian Le Mans Series recap of season 2021.
Yes, that's what we've got to do today. A season that ended a few weeks ago, but life has taken us on this glorious journey in the meantime, and also there's just been so much news. So we are finally backtracking to talk about the Asian Le Mans Series for 2021, and we might just squeeze a little tidbit of Daytona in there as well. But before we get into that, we've got to say thank you to the racingline.app, your personalized motorsport calendar. Thank you for supporting this podcast and everything you do. Convert time zones and choose your series and have it work in a way that doesn't involve me with a spreadsheet and things going on fire. Search up the racingline.app or on the iOS store. And yeah, we should get into it. So the Asian Le Mans Series, right? Boy howdy, that was a schedule. I don't think I've seen any series cram 4 races, which ended up being 16 hours worth of motorsport, into 2 weekends without it being a 24-hour race. It was just a lot of racing very, very quickly.
Yeah, we had an entire season in less than 3 weeks. That was intense.
Well, it ended up being the races themselves were all in the space of a week. So it was Saturday 1 was race 1 and Saturday 2 was race 4. That's a lot. And
no, it really was just. I don't want to say too much, but man, I felt exhausted after watching all of them in that short a time. Like, I'll just say that. February never seemed so endurance heavy in terms of events on the calendar.
Well, yeah, exactly. In the previous years, it was the biggest break of the calendar in February, because you had the Bathurst 12-hour in the first week of February, and then the last round of the Asian Le Mans Series at the last week of February. But yeah, because the Bathurst 12-hour wasn't a thing this year, may it come back in the future, pretty please. And the whole everything with the Asian Le Mans Series, we just had this very compressed injection of endurance racing, and it was a lot. It was a very grueling schedule, and like with the qualifying and the practice and the testing, it just seemed that there was cars on track every single day for a week. It was a lot. It really was a lot.
The thing too to note with just the location of both of the races was that who would have thunk that the Middle East could really be a good spot for hosting all these events, like kind of back to back and whatnot. You know, just from the wrinkle that it's, not a ton of people that are there. You don't have a lot of local, I won't say restrictions and whatnot, but just the ability for COVID to really kind of be a looming threat. That it wasn't as big as if you were actually going to go to a normal Asian Le Mans Series round. Obviously with one of them already being around for the Asian Le Mans Series. So I think it was, it definitely spoke for the times that we're still in, and I feel like, sure, Asian Le Mans Series is definitely not going to do financially as good this year compared to other years, but I think that how they did this just to pull it off and to be able to get it done and to really not have any issues with that is, you got to applaud them for that. So.
Absolutely. So to Cyril Taysharon, the entire crew, the organizing crew, the media crew, and everyone, that's an incredible achievement. We'll talk a bit more about that at the end of the show. But let's quickly, if you missed the races, there was 2 races in Dubai back-to-back, and then 2 races at Yas Marina. We'll just very quickly talk about the races in like a little bit of detail before we'll talk about the championship as a whole, because really, with it all so compressed, you can talk about the championship as a whole, which is nice. So Dubai race 1, the thing that really was the defining moment of the first race in Dubai was the Jota Sport car with Sean Gelael at the wheel, leading in traffic and then destroying 2 teams' races at once within the first 20 minutes. It was not a great run for Gelael in that race. I think he took out the Phoenix car while trying to pass it for the lead, and then G-Drive just had the luxury to run on and take a uncontested victory with the sister car, spilling 20 litres of oil cumulatively over the course of the race. They had like some sort of slow drip or something which forced them into the pits in shorter intervals, so they didn't really have a challenge. United did United things in P3, and then we had a very interesting battle in GT between the Precoat Herberth number 91 car and the GPX Racing number 40, I believe it's the 44 car, where it was a change, like a very different strategy where they were using their pro drivers and AM drivers, and which resulted in the pro driver for the Precoat Herberth team coming with a full head of steam, chasing down the AM driver of the GPX Racing team. So this is Robert Renau versus Alain Ferte. And unfortunately, Ferte made a mistake on the last lap and ceded the victory. So it was a pretty. What would you say, Cookie? Your thoughts on race 1? It was a pretty steady race, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I again, for how everything is going, with everything happening in such a condensed schedule, it's, the not necessarily like the importance of the race, but just for that, all of this stuff really does matter, and you have to be on your A game from the start, and times to be able to reset if you do make mistakes in the first race are less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of telling to see how teams would first attack the championship and obviously the track, and then just to see, the level of kind of competition that we saw was pretty intense for the entire field, and that was really good to see. I mean, and obviously the amount of GT cars, I think was also just a noteworthy point too. Just a quick note with the Sean Galale. We kind of did see almost just like a progression of getting his feet wet in endurance racing, really. I mean, just from being in the open wheel segment for, however many years, it kind of was that prototypical, just wanting to go all the time and just trying to gun it. And you saw, how that
played out,
essentially progressed. Yeah, exactly. And it just interesting to note too, as we work through the next races, almost where he got more of his feet under him, and it wasn't necessarily that he didn't have his feet under him this time. Just there was that awkwardness of maybe multi-class endurance racing and having those slower traffic to contend with, and when to pick your battles and when to really be aggressive and be on the attack. So it seemed kind of almost typical for how I would almost want to see an open wheel driver try to translate that into prototype racing. But I thought it was a great race. With some frustrations there, but overall, I think the good caliber of all the classes, I guess, or the good talent in all the classes seemed to rise to the top. So.
Yeah, it was a steady race, and it was an interesting note you make there about Galeo's involvement, because that was literally the first run through traffic, as in they were passing the GT leaders. I specifically remember that it was the GT leader at the time, the Porsches, that they came up on, and it was like the first opportunity he got, and he just sent it down the inside, and it all just kind of turned into a bit of a poo. So that we, as you made mention, we will talk a bit more about Galeo throughout the series. He did go through a little bit of a hero's journey redemption arc, but I want to quickly mention before that the Porsche domination, just they seem to be much better instead than the rest of the field, and that continued in race 2. So in race 2 we had the same battle for the lead between GPX and Precoat Herberth, but this time GPX had swapped their drivers around throughout the race. They'd swapped their strategies, so that way they had their pro driver in at the end of the race, and that was enough for them to take the victory. On the other hand, we had an early safety car for... I'm trying to remember. There was a cast off at the end of turn 1. There was contact at the end of turn 1 between one of the BMWs and a Ferrari, which caused a safety car. And we had some great P2 battles in that section as well. I think we had Arjun Maini in the Racing Team India car, which really took it to the fore and was almost leading at one point. So we had like 5-car battle in P2 before it really spread out. And then the G-Drive crew really put in a pit stop to eclipse Phoenix before Galeo again caused contact with a P3 car and took himself and another group out of the race. So here we go, Galeo again. That second race for Dubai, it was a bit... What were your thoughts, first of all?
So prefacing before we get into the second race, because I don't think it was as good as the first one. I think that Dubai has made, at least Dubai Autodrome has made an argument for if they do hold a Middle Eastern round and it's not Bahrain to do something there,
Yeah.
because I knew that track for GT racing, and they obviously had some P3 racing before a little bit.
Yes,
Just a little bit.
As part of the Festival of Endurance, including the Dubai 24 hours, they do a P3 race there.
I thought that was a great track for prototype racing too. There was kind of maybe in the back of my head, it was like maybe this is just a good GT only track or something like that, to like maybe a VIR stuff, and just with how open and, asphalt laden the whole thing is, but it still was very, very good. And I think that there was rhythm parts, there was stuff that were disturbed for the P2 drivers to have to work around solar traffic with, and there was a good ebb and flow to it, and I thought it was solid. So I thought that, if there was a potential thing to maybe, if they don't go to Bahrain at some point, that would be also a really good track, because I don't know.
I totally agree with
Bahrain
that.
doesn't excite me.
I like Bahrain for prototype racing and multi-class racing. I really, really do. But you do make a good point. The most technical part of the circuit is technical, but it's open and flowing. It's like that run down through 4, 5, and then round back through 6 and 7, which is where we saw all the contact between Sean Gallale and the other drivers. So I think it has put a good case forward, and you could certainly see the teams that had experience at Dubai, especially in GT, were a step above everyone else, particularly GPX, who had GPX and Herberth, who had won the Dubai 24 hour. So I will agree that the second race at Dubai didn't really have the same allure as the first one. We did get something that we didn't really get in the first race, which was great battling in P2. I think because in the first race, everyone kind of tripped over themselves in the first race. So we did have a good period of the race where there was actual battling in P2. But overall, it was just a little less enthralling, I think. That's not to say that it wasn't as good a quality. It was just a little less exciting. A lot more watching the timing screen than watching the battles on track.
I mean, and again, I think that's more of like me maybe looking at the podium, like, because obviously there was the 25 and 64 that are battling right at the end there, and that was pretty close, for second, third, fourth, just to see who gets on the podium. Yeah. So that was interesting. But yeah, I think overall too, it was just, there was, it kind of shrunk a little bit, in terms of, where everybody was pace wise with each other in the gaps. But then, yeah, it started to kind of expand a bit, and, it settled into more of a little bit of a, not procession, but it was a little bit more like, okay, it's, there's not that potential excitement for there to be an extra battle. But again, the timing or the finishing times are definitely close. It almost seems somewhat closer than race 1, but I definitely got that feeling that race 2 just didn't have that much pop in it, and I'm not sure why.
I think there is an answer as to why that is, and we'll talk a bit more about it later, but I will say that there was some action missed in P3, and particularly in GT at the very end of the race, for the minor positions that really should have been brought to the fore and kind of wasn't. So that might have been why as well. I mean, the gaps for 5th, 6th, and 7th, 4th, 5th, and 6th in GT were less than 2 seconds between all three of them. So it was a bit of a shame that we missed out on that, but it was, we'll talk a bit more about that later. So for the first race, we did mention the number 26 G-Drive racing car took the win ahead of the Yoda Sport car and then Phoenix Racing. The second G-Drive car was the one that struggled with the oil problem. And then in P3, it was just United, Nielsen, United. So, all the usual suspects there. GT, we made mention, Prickett, Herberth, Motorsport taking that on the penultimate lap. GPX Racing actually got a penalty for track limits violations on that last lap as well. So they dropped to 4th behind the Inception Racing McLaren and the Walkenhorst Motorsport BMW, which was the best result for the BMW for the entire season. In the second race, it was G-Drive from G-Drive 26 winning once again. Then Phoenix Racing, then Racing Team India. Yoda Sport got a bit more damage that time around, so they dropped to 6th. Then in P3, it was United, and then Nielsen. So again, the same usual suspects. And then GPX Racing with the strategy change got first ahead of Rinaldi. And then Garage 59, the Aston Martin in the hands of Maxime Martin, doing very well in the late stages of that race to kind of work its way through the pack. So there's a little bit more on the Garage 59 story when we talk about the second race at Yas Marina. But overall, Dubai, it was it was kind of over before we even really got into it. It felt like just had this big build, and then all of a sudden there's 2 races, and then it's done. Where we go next?
Yep. And again, yeah, there was that fever pitch to it where it was, not only are a lot of these teams looking at these quick turnaround times, but if there was contact and some damage, there was quick turnaround time for repairs. And we saw a few cars with some bare carbon with some of their panels and replacement panels, just to make sure that they had the right aerodynamics and just had that car repaired enough to be on the grid and race either the next day or the next week.
Yeah.
So you definitely saw that. And then lastly too, that we did see, this is the first iteration of the LMP3s.
Yes.
The new version of the LMP3s. So we saw 3 of them. 3 different chassis, at least, as far as I know.
Yes.
Competing at Abu Dhabi and not Abu Dhabi, Dubai, excuse me, and
then again at Abu Dhabi.
Right, but and yeah, so but it's interesting too to note, that Duquesne and Ligier kind of seem to pick up where they left off. I mean, obviously their aero engineering didn't seem to be too crazy different from their first iterations of the P3 chassis, but it was really good to see the Ginetta at least be on the grid. And even though they've had lackluster results for those first 2 rounds, I think DNF on the first race, and then having like a in sort of in the mix P9 for the class finish for the second race. At least it's good to see, and that is a looker. That is a looker.
Yeah, I will say those smooth lines on the Ginetta are very sexual, but they did struggle throughout the series, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on. They only just achieved classification in race 2 at Dubai after having a very problem run in, race 1. So that was Dubai, and then Yas Marina had a few sessions of testing before getting straight into the same format, 1 qualifying session, 2 races. Now, it was very interesting here, what you made mention of just a second ago about, bits of cars breaking off and having to be very conservative with your spares and everything. There were quite a few incidents in testing at Yas Marina, including a bit of a scary off for Tom Blomqvist in the Jodasport car, where he made contact with the wall on the outside of turn 1, and so they had to basically rebuild that car, the Jodasport car, overnight to get that car in for practice and for qualifying. So the fact that they managed to do that in itself was quite impressive, and then what they managed to do with that was also quite impressive, because in Yas Marina Race 1, it was a bit of a redemption for Galeo, who managed to drive a 3-hour stint in its victory for the Jodasport car. Ended up winning by over a lap, which is a bit of a extended gap considering, where everyone was on the track at the time at the end of the race. But there was a significant lack of pace for the G-Drive cars in a straight line, which saw them finish a lap back, about a minute apart from each other, and then Phoenix Racing down in 5th. And very interesting as well, a double retirement in the first 20 or so minutes for United Autosports meant that they didn't lock out the podium. It was Nielsen Racing 1 and 2 who knocked out the podium, and then United Autosports finished in 3rd. So again, the usual suspects in P3. And GT was a bit of a mixed bag. Again, it was Porsche from Porsche, and then Formula Racing, the number 60 Ferrari taking home 3rd place. It surprises me that even in the condensed format, that we still had all the same names up the top of each of the classes. I would have expected a little more variance, but I guess we get that in the next race.
Yeah, I think too, to note as well, with some BOP changes, you kind of expected a little bit more of a shakeup, or at least maybe more of a condensation of lap times from some of the different chassis. But really, again, like you said, it was that Porsche GT3R running kind of almost away with it in that first race, and kind of like leaving the Ferraris, Mercedes, and AMRs kind of in the dust, really. Oh, and the BMW. Sorry, I didn't want to miss that one. But yeah, I think that you make a good point, really, because honestly, if the United Autosports didn't have that issue pretty much off the start for one of their cars, then obviously the other one having issues early on, we were looking very close to, again, having like a very, very United Autosport heavy podium in LMP3. And that really was a little bit of the shakeup that you saw from the major classes there in terms of the prospective winners, because you still had G-Drive and Jota really kind of being the class of the field, and while everybody else was kind of playing catch-up with them to see if they have an issue or anything like that, it really, like you said, was a little bit more of the same that we got from the first 2 races.
Yeah, and it was still surprising to me that even with United tripping up, it was still United and Nielsen on the podium. Like, they are obviously the class of the field. They were the ones coming over from Europe. Nielsen were last year's champions, by the way, as well. So it's just, they just keep being there. And there are other stories in P3 that we'll definitely talk about at the end of this segment, but they are just something else between the two of them. They are the dynasty in P3. It's kind of scary.
It's too for both of those organizations too that they can continue and maintain. I mean, obviously with United Autosports, but I think that Nielsen Racing kind of is more or less proving that they are, equivalent to like a Eurosport, Eurasia, almost like Eurasia, Jota, that kind of stuff. Even JCDC way back when and all that stuff, where that they had that hit that caliber of competition level, and I mean, you kind of almost have to, give them a slight nod to potentially win it outside of United Autosport, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they went to Le Mans last year for winning this championship. So we'll talk a little bit more about Le Mans invites at the end of the show. But yeah, it was... so this is the one race that I didn't actually catch live. So I did have to catch up on this, and I may have missed things in it. But I was particularly surprised to see how dominant the Porsche was again as well. Because even with BOP changes, even with, I think they got 40 kilograms of ballast... The GPX car was just unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the strategies that they've got, and just their comfort with the GT3 platform in general. I mean, and in the races that they've previously run, there's a level of comfort when you're just repeating the same kind of deal over and over again, and especially when you're. We can't stress enough, I guess, how condensed this calendar schedule is, just from like the dates and themselves, just so that you can kind of maintain your even keel, even if something goes right, something goes wrong, you're staying in that level. And any kind of little edge and experience that you have, either at these tracks or just, I mean, in the region, or just even that, they've been racing here in, January or February every year, that kind of thing. There's just a level of advantage or comfort that you can almost massage and make it an advantage that's on track. And so I feel like, even if GPX wasn't in that Porsche, they would still be up there with whatever chassis they have, just based on their comfort and their experience level at these tracks, and especially at this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, GPX literally is the driving school for Yas Marina. That they are positioned at Yas Marina. Right. Their drivers are the driving school.
Well, I didn't want to say that, because then it's like, oh, there's the advantage. But yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly
right. So now the final race of the Asian Le Mans series, race 4, the second race of Yas Marina. That one was incredible. Did you end up watching the whole thing like I told you to do? Did you end up watching it with timing?
Yes. How? I didn't watch it with timing, but I did watch the whole thing.
How good was that race?
It was very good. On the TV, it wasn't I think as good as it could have been, but it was very, very good.
Yeah.
And it had kind of everything that you would want from like an exciting, action-packed endurance race. And it delivered, absolutely.
Yeah, so I ended up writing the report. So this race started at 11 p.m. for me, or 10:30 p.m. for me. So it finished at 2:30 in the morning. I spent an hour and a half writing literally 2,500 words about this race, just trying to tell the story properly. Because, oh my god, there was so much to tell. So NP, Norwegian Petrolhead in the chat, does make a great point. It started off with a lot of yellow flag, which... was very unfortunate, and especially for the two Ferraris. I think it was not Kessel Racing Ferrari. It was the, whereabouts is it? The AF Corsa Ferrari and the Rinaldi Ferrari, which had a big accident at the end of the long straight, which brought out the safety car, the Formula Racing Ferrari, the two AF Corsa Ferraris. There we go, we got there in the end. The 51 and the 54 had a big accident at the end of the long straight, not
the long straight, the alternate pit straight.
The second long straight, because it's the curved long straight. Because if you find the Tech Pro at Abu Dhabi, you've done a great job, and they were buried in it. So it's something very obviously went wrong there.
Yeah, it was like a brake failure. It had to be something, hung throttle or whatever, because there was heavy damage, and both of them were in the tire barrier. So it had to be something where one of them had a high speed impact with the other, and both of them sailed into it. So and both of them were taken to hospital for observation, I believe.
Yeah, so I think Thomas Floor got out of the car and he was fine, and Francesco Piovanetti had a little more observation, but from what I've heard, he was also fine, which is very, very good to see. Honestly, after an impact like that, to have both drivers get out of the cars and be okay was very, very good. But that brought out 40 minutes of yellow flag within the first hour, 40 minutes of safety car. Now, something we didn't make mention of is that in every class except for P2, you had a mandated number of timed pit stops. So you had to do 3 pit stops that were 110 seconds throughout the race. And a lot of teams managed to get 1 or 2 of those pit stops done in that first hour because of the safety car. And then it became a bit of a game of who's got their pit stops done and what strategies are all these different teams on building to the end of the race. And at one point in the GT race, we had, I think it was 8 cars on different strategies with different driver talent, all in with a chance of playing themselves into the victory. It was kind of cool. But what this did mean as well was that a few cars got burned because they had their pro drivers in when they had all that safety car, and then a few cars got an advantage because they had their AM drivers in when they had all that safety car. So it was a really cool, really interesting mix. And it was really the Aston Martins and the BMWs who got burned, and then the Ferraris, the Porsches, and the McLarens that came up to the fore. And it was such a cool race in that middle part of GT, just kind of trying to figure out who was going to end up where, and that built so nicely. And in that as well, you had the same thing happening in P3, and the P2 battle was constant throughout the race.
Well, and I think at some point, with a little over an hour to go, or it was under an hour ago, GG was still kind of going that it was that there was still all to play for in the race, and that you didn't really know still yet what the final strategy was going to be for some of these teams, because it was like, unless you were tracking it from the start and how that they, with their pros and M's, and for how that they were for short pitting, short fueling, that kind of stuff, you really didn't know really where the excellent strategies were going to be laid out until you got into the last 30 minutes of the race.
See, you say that, but I absolutely called it. On, like, the first hour of the race, I put up a tweet saying that the Car Guy team had done all their timed pit stops, and they were, because at this point they were like second last in GT, and I said on Twitter, you can timestamp it, you can see where I said it, these guys are going to come through the field, watch for them, because they're going to play a masterstroke here. And they did! They came through, they short fielded at the end, they dropped out in front of everyone, and they won the race! I'm proud of myself for that.
Oh, and I mean, and again, it was just some brilliant overtakes too. I mean, especially with the slow corner chicane. I mean, like there's some of them where you're just like, whoa, okay, the car guy went through, and you're like, they had to make that work along with that excellent strategy, and I felt like that was, you saw just a lot, obviously more overtaken that way, but it was a brilliant call, brilliant plan from them, and an awesome race victory for them. Victory, I should say. It
was a good thing that you mentioned those overtakes, because in the middle of the race, they did something that none of the other teams could do, and that was get through some of the slower traffic. I made mention about the Aston Martins getting a little burned. They had, I think it was Alexander West and, I'm trying to quickly remember the other driver in that car, because they did a great job. It was Michael Benham in the other Garage 59 car, who basically act as little stoppers for the guys like Herberth Motorsport and Rinaldi Racing, who kind of just got stuck trying to pass the slower AM drivers, whereas I think it was Combe Ledegar, or it was Combe Ledegar in the car in the middle stint, who managed to make those moves, and that's really what delivered them the race win. And they still had to build a gap at the end, because it was looking like Inception Racing with Ben Barnicoat was going to steal that from them, but they did a really good job.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's talk about the McLaren too, grabbing their first podium for the season for Asian Law Series, and just a solid effort for them. Obviously, that it worked out in their favor with the early safety cars, but I think it really speaks for how that program is starting to hopefully evolve, and I I hope to see more of that kind of success as we get through into the European rounds.
Yeah, absolutely, and they will take a Le Mans invite as well for Optimum Motorsport and Inception Racing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but let's just tie off this nice little Yas Marina race in a bow. While that all played out, the GT battle finished in the last 10 minutes. The P3 battle finished in the last 10 minutes, with United Autosports taking a pretty incredible 1-2-3 in that race.
Yep.
1-2-3, like, that is...
They are the evil empire?
They're
the friendly evil empire.
Yes, absolutely. Right? And I just want to quickly mention, they have six automatic entries.
Seven.
Yes.
It's something like that, yeah.
They have an absurd amount of automatic entries for Le Mans. I actually had to research and write them all down because I couldn't believe it myself. So they have a Le Mans... This is their list of Le Mans invites. So, they are the reigning Le Mans P2 champions, so they get an automatic invite for that. They were first and second in the 2020 ELMS P2 class, so they get 2 invites for that. They were first in the 2020 ELMS P3 class, so they get an automatic invite for that. They won the Asian Le Mans Series in P3, so that's 5 automatic invites. Plus, they are a full season WEC entrant, so they have 6 automatic invites for Le Mans this year. 6 of them!
Yeah. It's incredible, and then also to note that they are exercising 3 of them. They're going to have 3 cars, it seems, at Le Mans and LMP2. So, one more than I think they've had before. They usually only under 2. But yeah, it just speaks for the absolute domination of that entire group, that they could essentially lock up 6 automatic invites, and if they wanted to exercise them, they would have 6 United Autosport entries racing in P2 at Le Mans.
They are the United Empire.
Right, and the weird part is that we're all not really upset by that, because it's they're doing it the right way.
The
I mean,
ACO way, yeah.
Right, they're going by kind of the letter of the law here, and they're doing everything the right way. And I mean, how am I supposed to complain about that? I mean, they have the resources and the manpower and the skill set to really get it done, and I think that should absolutely be rewarded. And I'm glad that they're going to have 3 cars this year. I would be fine if they showed up with 6, to be honest. I mean, yeah, they might stink the show up a bit, but hey, I mean, they absolutely deserve to kind of showcase their talents as a group. I mean, it's remarkable.
It is remarkable. You know how we kind of complain about P2 becoming LMP Orica? We might have to update. Yeah. We might have to update that and just call it LMP United. That's the reality of where we're going at the moment. Anyway, to finish off on that race as well, while all of those battles were being resolved and we were in the last 10 minutes of the race, Franco Colapinto in the number 25 G-Drive car ran down Sean Galeo in the Jodasport car for the overall race victory, and we had 2 laps at the end of the race where it was back and forth like some touring car stuff between these 2 P2 cars, and that was an incredible way to end the season. And Sean Galeo absolutely had the full redemption arc here, taking home a double win in Yas Marina, managing to hold off Franco Colapinto at the very end there. So that was how it ended in P2, and really, with all 3 classes building to a climax like that, you couldn't ask for anything more.
Yeah, and speaking of Sean Galeo again, I mean, that was where I was kind of heading with it, that he had some, first outing blues, we'll say, and from switching from that open wheel to sports car endurance prototype racing. But I mean, at Abu Dhabi, I mean, he absolutely shined. And both races, I mean, the Hero Stint, over 3-hour stints, basically surrendering only a single stint to Tom Blomqvist in that first race, and then doing something very similar, not as heavy on the time length, but just for how intense the race was for him, at least just to defend that race lead. At the end, I mean, he absolutely shown his stuff and skill, and why. I mean, if he can't be an open wheel, I would absolutely love for him to stay in prototype racing. He's a talented prototype driver.
Well, to be fair, the entire reason the Jodasport car was entered into the Asian Le Mans Series was for Galeo to drive. Like, he was I'm pretty sure he was funding that entire thing, and it's not often that you see Tom Blomqvist only get 1 stint in a car and the car still wins. So there's certainly some skill there, and certainly some promise there for that entry in the WEC season. So yeah, he absolutely had a full redemption arc. So well done, Sean. I think coming off of Dubai, we were all very nonplussed by his performances, especially when in traffic. But he did a great job in changing a few people's minds, including mine.
I mean, right, and he had some sketchy times in the feeder series of Formula One too the last couple of years as well. I mean, he there was a little bit of flash in the pan kind of deal with that, and then there would be some questionable kind of attacking decisions in terms of just being more patient, and I think people were very worried after the first two races that was kind of going to continue to show through, and you don't want to do that in endurance racing at all, and that's not going to get you any extra seat time anywhere. So it was very good to see him absolutely turn around and really be the driver almost of the weekend, in my opinion, of Abu
yes,
Dhabi.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I will agree with that, but we'll discuss more about that in a second. So the championships ended up going to the G-Drive number 26 car, which was Yifei Ye, Ferdinand Habsburg, and Rene Binder. So they get a Le Mans invite for that, which is part of the reason that G-Drive enters the Asian Le Mans series nowadays. The United number 23 car, as you mentioned, grabbed the P3 automatic invite, which, again, half a dozen invites for United Autosport's kind of scary. Herberth Motorsport, the number 99 car, GPX number 40, the Porsche, they both got automatic invites after Herberth won the championship in the last race. The Optimum Racing Inception Motorsport number 7 McLaren won an automatic invite as well for third place. And the Rinaldi Racing number 55 Ferrari also took the last automatic invite on offer in the GT class. There was also an LMP2 AM class and a GT AM class. LMP2 AM was won pretty uncontested by the ERA Motorsport team, backing up their Daytona victory, which is how
they survived is more or less how the Daytona victory, for sure.
And I mean, you could say the same thing about this season as well in the Asian Le Mans series, because their only competitor, which was I'm going to have to quickly find them here, Euro International, just kind of never really got off the ground in their effort, unfortunately. And GTM went the way of Kessel Racing with Rinaldi Racing with Patrick Kujula. Just every single time Kujula was in the car, something happened, and it had an even 50-50 chance of being something amazing, like him just tearing through the field, or something terrible, like him running into someone or getting a track limits penalty.
Yeah, it definitely felt like that, and I mean, good that we are having those classes. We wish we have a little bit more entries with them, but at the same time, yeah, you could definitely see the difference between some of the calibers of the driver entries for those for that class.
Yeah. So that's basically a very short wrap up of each of the races. Now, if you did not see the Yas Marina race 2, I 100% it starts off very slow because of the long safety car instance, but get on it, watch the replay. If you have the capability to get on the timing.71 website and catch a replay of the live timing as well, get in on that, because that race, it had everything that you want from an endurance race. And pay particular attention to when the pit stops are being taken and what length they are, because that will really add the color to the background of that race. Because I think that's quite possibly, certainly race of the year so far, but quite possibly one of the best endurance races I've seen in the last, one of the best non-Bathurst 12-hour or Nürburgring 24-hour races I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years.
I thought you weren't going to be putting all those qualifiers in, but you just snuck them in at the end. So
I can't say it's better than Bathurst the last 2 years, because Bathurst the last 2 years, it's been incredible.
Yeah, the Campbell Pass at the coming down the hill. Man.
Oh my god,
that was so good, good.
And then the finish with the Bentley with the puncture that somehow put them further ahead. I just thought, Jules Gunnarsson. That was incredible. So now let's just discuss a bit more about the series on the whole. So we're going to be doing a bit more of like free-form discussions here, so we're going to be a little bit more over the place. But we'll go through, I've got some points here that we can just work our way through. So the first one I wanted to mention is the qualifying in the schedule. So we had this condensed schedule, so it was 16 hours of racing in 8 days, including practice, testing, qualifying, and all that as well. One qualifying session for 2 races. So your first best lap sets race 1, your second best lap sets race 2. Did the qualifying and the scheduling promote better racing, or did it force more conservative racing, or what were your thoughts? How did you think that went? Because it was grueling. It was grueling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about it, because I just feel like if we're doing that kind of stuff anyway, why not just maybe invert the field, that kind of thing, and just let's see what happens that way. And if people want to try to do weird strategies of driving super slow for no reason to get the pole, I guess go for it and see how that works. I mean, I would have been fine to do something like that, just because of the way that how these weekends were condensed, that you really, I felt like you really couldn't get a whole lot of like a prototypical, practice, qualify session, race, that kind of stuff. So you were already amending a lot of this race weekend traditions and just kind of the normal muscle memory of a lot of these teams. So why not just mix it up a little bit? If not anything for the fans, let's just try that. So I felt like they maybe could have done some slight other things just to maybe make it a little bit more exciting. However, I mean, I'm fine with it. If they want to take first lap, second lap, best lap to determine that stuff, then that's fine. But or maybe do something with like the drivers, maybe the slowest driver in the group, take those lap times instead of like I don't know, something like that would have been more interesting. But I'm more of just I'm wild card, I guess.
You are
so
a
I felt
wild
like
card.
maybe we could have done a little bit more wild card that way. But I just felt like it was I think appropriate for how the series and schedule were handling such a short season.
Yeah,
I think. How about you?
I didn't mind it. The main issue I had with the format was that it wasn't communicated well during the sessions. So we were, very, very focused on the first qualifying, because, you see your best lap times. It's like, oh, wow, pretty. But trying to go a little bit deeper and find the second best lap in the grid for the second race, it was more difficult than it could have been. And I know that there was some difficulties behind the scenes. I think through one of the qualifying sessions, they lost like an entire class of timing, so they just had no information besides the cars going across the line. So I'm sensitive to that, and that's part of the condensed schedule and running by the seat of your pants and all that sort of stuff. But I think it could have been communicated a little better during the session. That's pretty much my only gripe with it. I don't actually mind that format as a qualifying vehicle, I guess, because it did add a little bit of variance, like not heaps, because United Autosport still did that thing where they're just good and just got positions, and I don't think we saw any variance in the top 3 in GT at Dubai. I think there were the same 3 cars but just swapped around. So it's not like there was massive changes. It was just a little hard to get your head around encountering it for the first time. And I have there is a precedent for this sort of format being used. I remember when the supercars, the V8 supercars, raced at Yas Marina as a support build for the F1. They had 3 races with 1 qualifying session, and it was your top 3 laps sets race 1, race 2, race 3. And the top 5 cars were the same across all 3 races, which I think was a little funny. But yeah, I wasn't entirely sold on it, but I wasn't entirely not sold on it. It was a nice little experiment, in my opinion. The schedule was brutal. Like, the fact that Yodasport managed to get their car on the grid for the Yas Marina races was ridiculous after that incident.
Yeah, that was going to be tough, and I think that was, as much as you could prepare for that. Obviously the quick turnaround, it's difficult to do so in general, just from the outset that you have such a limited time frame to do it, and especially with that testing accident, you were definitely going to be. They were way behind the 8 ball with that, and just to kind of be able to rebound from that was incredible. And I think it was, but again, that's just how I feel like we're not necessarily where it.
it's a neutralizer, but it definitely kind of tried to it tried to make everybody be on the back foot. However, I think what it also did was that the teams that are way more organized, way more focused, have way more experience, and just more mileage on some with their teams and drivers are just going to naturally have an advantage with that, because while it is not necessarily the same rituals that they're used to doing, I mean I feel like their ability to try to adapt to a completely alien environment in terms of how they're having to prep themselves for 2 races in basically less than 24 hours was they would have more advantage that way. So
yeah,
that's where I struggle with that, because I did like we had back-to-back races, but I do feel like in terms of an advantage, it does give some of those better, well-funded, and more experienced teams a little bit of an edge over some of the ones that might be a little bit more or that might not have had as much experience turning cars around and trying to get everything ready in such a tight schedule.
Yeah, and to follow on from that, the fact that you have such a condensed schedule means your testing and practice sessions get shortened, and there was fog in Dubai as well, so we lost an entire practice session at Dubai. And you think about the AM drivers who might not have encountered this this racetrack before. You're driving P3 cars, brand new P3 cars for some of these cars that haven't ever been raced before, or you've never sat in these cars before, and all of a sudden your first run at it, and you're doing competitive laps in qualifying. It's a bit of a struggle to get your head around that quickly. I mean, sure, you have professional race drivers, this is their job to do that, but it doesn't just come like that. It's a process, and the shortening of the process doesn't make it quicker, it makes it less perfect.
Yep, absolutely.
So
yeah, I thought it was good. I mean, it has some strengths and weaknesses, but I thought that it was going to give you an interesting slice of kind of how some of these endurance teams can handle some pretty intense pressure.
And it showed to me that especially in P2 and P3, the guys to keep your eyes on are G-Drive Racing, who are run by Algarve for the weekends, and United Autosports, because United Autosports were just the evil empire. We'll talk a bit more about them in a second. But G-Drive Racing in particular, their pace in qualifying was astounding. They didn't quite match it at Yas Marina in terms of the race, but at Dubai, they were untouchable for a lot of the races, to the point where it was in race 1 everyone had little bits of problems, so it was hard to get a read. But in race 2, when the chips were down, they came out ahead, and they won pit stops battles with I remember Phoenix Racing came in with a 2-second lead over the number 26 car, 25 car, in the middle part of the race, and it was a tire change, it was refueling, and the 25 was out 5 seconds ahead of the Phoenix Racing car. That doesn't just happen. That is incredible work from the pit lane and the crew there, and it kind of broke up the battles in P2. So the question I wanted to pose for you: did the series have the wealth of quality to sustain those longer battles in P2, the same way that the European Le Mans Series has? Was there enough battling in P2 to keep the overall race interesting?
A half-hearted yes and no on that, because I mean,
wow, sit on the fence harder. Does your butt ever get?
Yeah, I mean, yes, they had quality racing because they had quality teams and quality drivers, but at the same time, it was a little bit more of a feast and famine kind of deal when it comes to the team backgrounds, and where you really didn't have the opportunity for some of these more quote unquote local teams to maybe show to the front. I mean, they have a good reference point. They have a good meter stick kind of for where they need to get to in order to compete against some of these globe-trotting international LMP2 teams that clearly have the ability with and all the X factor with their pits, with strategy, driver lineups, that kind of stuff, that they shone through. But at the same time too, the amount of entries for LMP2 was a little bit down, and just from the fact that now there was such a, I'm not going to say it was a huge gap, but there was definitely a gap between a Jota and the Algarve G-Drive Racing teams versus the RTI and Phoenix Racing and that kind of stuff, where you kind of did see that separation between the haves and almost have-nots when it came to that. So
Yeah, I mean, that's where I just want to qualify it with that, where I'm like, I'm bummed because there should be more of those teams to maybe fight it out behind the G Drives and Jodas. But it just shows to the caliber that those two organizations, or at least Algarve showing up with Joda, can prove to the world that essentially, like, bring it on, but we'll take you on outside of, I guess, United Autosports. So
yeah, that's actually an incredibly measured response from the wild card that you are. And
I'm a wild card that I might even give a measured response when you least expect it. So that's the most wild card I can possibly be here.
Absolutely, you are just absolutely could be anywhere. And you do make a good point. You know, the fact that Eurasia weren't in the series, Inter Europol weren't in the series. You know, those guys that we've come to expect in the Asian Le Mans series weren't really there. But you are right in saying, I think feast and famine was a great way of putting it, because there were times, I think, particularly after the safety car in race 2 at Dubai, where you had Rene Binder, John Falb, Simon Trummer, Arjun Maini, who I want to talk about a little more later on, and Sean Galale in the mix, all 5 of them making positions, making passes for a good stint. That was really cool. But yeah, there is a little bit of, definitely a separation in driver talent, sure. Separation in team talent, sure. But it certainly didn't have the same overall quality as an ELMS field, because an ELMS field is ridiculous. Like 17 P2 cars. It's just, there are battles wherever you look. But I think particularly at Yas Marina, when we had in that last race, when we had that go down to the wire, it certainly seemed like there was the quality. I would have just loved to have had just a little more of it just throughout the season, just a little more.
A Eurasia would have been so great, because I think that they would not necessarily set the standard, but they certainly are a good another meter measuring stick. How that analogy again to where the Asian Le Mans series kind of can produce its cream of the crop per se, and throw that up against Jota and an Algarve G Drive team and see kind of where the chips fall there.
Yeah.
And so, you did have this, local teams, but they were not really, to my opinion, not to the caliber that we were seeing some of the other, globetrotting teams come in and to compete. But I do still see, though, that this is something that can be attractive for these international teams that might not be G Drive or Jota, just to be able to come in here as well and, maybe sneak a win, or at least get into that championship, discussion where you can start getting those automatic invites. And so I think that there is still, just from that wrinkle alone, that's why you're seeing, the caliber of teams that you are seeing in LMP2 show up and, really show their worth. So,
yeah. Absolutely. And part of the condensed off-site schedule, I think, meant that a lot of those Asian-based teams couldn't really make the journey, especially in P2. And prototype racing in Asia is something that has taken a long time to take hold. It hasn't been the same as Europe, where everyone's just chomping at the bit to get into some prototypes. Has been a function of the Asian motorsport market that prototype racing particularly has not been the forefront. It has been GT, which is reflected in the entries. But there was certainly enough, maybe not enough, maybe just not enough in P2 for the overall to keep
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I'd agree.
What about P2AM? That class has traditionally been for the older spec LMP2 machines. We have seen entries in the high single digits in years past. Last year we had low single digits, which turned out to be 2 cars by the time the series left Australia. It was 2 cars at the start of this season, which turned into 1 car after the first weekend. How does LMP2AM stay relevant and stay subscribed? Does it?
Okay, I have a wild suggestion here.
Yep.
But there should be some disadvantage, weight disadvantage, horsepower disadvantage, something to the Oreca 07.
Ooh.
And meaning that some of the teams will be advantaged by using alternate equipment. So somehow if a Riley gets over there, a Dallara or a Ligier, they would have a
Why did you
bespoke
start with
advantage.
the Riley?
because it's the most crazy LMP2 we have right now.
Yeah, fair.
I'm just saying, I think that in my view, you can't really bring back the old LMP2s or the non-ACO'd LMP2s because I thought that was an awesome, side race really from different equipment. You're getting different versions of the prototypes there, so you kind of can't use those. And really, I mean, that's really it. I mean, the Eureka is just the best car in LMP2 for its current regulations right now, just by a country mile. And I just feel like the way that this has to go, maybe even give some relevance to it, but just where teams can feel like they have an ability or advantage to win in something that isn't already almost set in stone, because it certainly feels like if you are trying to compete for LMP2 AM, like if you don't go Eureka, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So maybe that would maybe help. Although again, I don't know how that would potentially go down, where teams are going, okay, well, let me find the more difficult cars to find to even buy or run, and at the same time, limited potential parts and stuff. The Eureka just has so much built into it that you want to. But again, that's where I feel like this can be massaged a bit, where we can have maybe some more diversity for chassis in the LMP2 field, and like the money, the financial part of it, there isn't this huge push to be in the best equipment, fastest equipment all the time, blah 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 blah. Like, this is LMP2M, so maybe something like that, which again would be like Eureka would be so beside themselves. But again, like they have locked out fields in almost in every single sports car category right now that's running in any series that is running LMP2. It's Eureka's 95% of the time. So I just feel like that might be a good stopping place for these other chassis, and at least give some of those chassis manufacturers like a reason to run them, and also a reason to look for teams that could support them.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point, because what I was about to say, because this is the first time that they've had the current LMP2 generation in LMP2 AM. So if you're an LMP2 team, why not just run in the overall category? If you're not being, like, even if you are being bankrolled by an amateur driver, like, I'm sure Kyle Tilley and Dwight Merriman are not the most accomplished amateur drivers, but they still, ran a program in LMP2 AM. If it was one of those guys, if they had two cars, one of them in each car, and then a bunch of pro drivers, they might even be a challenge for overall wins. So I guess the question is, why would you run LMP2 AM when you can just run overall? And I think maybe the opportunity to run different equipment, or a different standard of racing might bring that in, perhaps.
Well, right. But like, to your point though, that's what I'm saying with some of these other chassis, where you're not basically asking a gentleman driver and somebody bankrolling the team to go, okay, so we want you to choose in between this category, which you could potentially win overall with almost essentially the same driver lineup, or this category, which is more or less where you're supposed to be, but then you're relegated to kind of
the also-rans, the has-beens.
Right, yeah. And you're using the exact same equipment. You're allowed to use pretty much identical stuff here or there to the guys that are winning overall. And it just makes zero sense for a lot of these guys to do it, outside of the potential for accolades from winning the championship, that kind of stuff. So,
and keep in mind as well, sorry to jump in over the top of you, if the category doesn't get enough entries, you don't get a spot at Le Mans. This is the new ACO function here. Le Mans invites are determined by how many people are running in the class. So it's not like last year where you just had a four car class where one car was guaranteed an entry. If you don't get enough entries, the class doesn't matter in terms of the entries for Le Mans, and that is what happened here.
Right, and again, where my idea comes into play is that, so not only now that you have the amateur driver, or that's bankrolling this to go, okay, then if we get enough entries in here, we could potentially get that Le Mans invite. You also have these manufacturers, these LMP2 manufacturers themselves, being their default in for potentially running at Le Mans, instead of having to court teams to basically be idiots
and select a car that is not as balanced and overall as fast as the Eureka in the same kind of competitive setting. Whereas if you have these auto invites and they already own the equipment and they already support you and your brand, it's a lot easier to basically have that auto invite and go, yeah, absolutely, we'll supply all the stuff you want. You proudly race our stuff. You say that it's like, the best car in the class. Ha 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 ha. It's LMP2 AM. But you still have that auto invite for that specific Ligier or Dallara or God knows O'Reilly. Like you have those auto invites to go to Le Mans, and that at least is a boon for some of those manufacturers to go like, okay, yeah, we basically have zero clout. But we still have a presence here, and we still have a chance, and there's still a team that's willing to run for us. Like, that gives another incentive outside of just having a hapless privateer, gentleman driver who can fund a bunch of stuff to make a quote-unquote worse decision for his money, I guess.
Yeah, I entirely agree with that. And for context on that point, last year at Le Mans, there were 4 cars that were not Orecas out of the, what did we have? That's 9, 12, 24 car field. So 1/6 of the class. 1/6? Yeah, that's right. 1/6 of the class. 3 Ligiers and a Dallara. And none of them did well.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, like that, and that again is where you're like, okay, well, you're giving the advantage a little bit back to some of these to that guy that's going to spend all that money. It's like, okay, yeah, he might not win Le Mans in his class, but he certainly is going to show up there and represent him and the manufacturer well. And hey, who knows? I mean, if you do get it's Le Mans, anything can happen, and he gets a podium, then that's again another win for huge. That manufacturer.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The only problem I have with that, though, Cookie, the only thing is that whenever any team has gone to an Oreca, they've just done so much better, including the most amateur of AM drivers. The fact that Fritz van Aert was hapless in a Dallara, then moved to an Oreca and immediately was 2 seconds a lap faster. As an AM driver and as a not exceptional AM driver at that. Fritz is a business owner. He's in his middle years of life. He's not a young professional, and the fact that even he, in one change of chassis, goes 2 seconds a lap faster is kind of points to how dominant the Oreca is. And we saw this in LMP1H, we're seeing this in LMP2, we're seeing this in LMP3. Everyone is going to converge on the best solution, and at the moment, the best solution is an Oreca 07.
Well, I mean, I agree, and that's where either you have to do a massive time penalty, or you have to just not allow the Eureka to run that class. And again, like the biggest problem with my idea is that the ACO essentially runs everything here, and they have not really been very good at being genuine and honest with how. With their mistakes and their and the way that this class is essentially just condensed to one car, which was really what none of us wanted. They would basically
clear was going to happen from the very start.
I mean, yes. I think when we were talking about this a few years ago, I thought maybe we'd have 2 or 3 cars, especially with the Joker updates and how that was being pushed as being something to really even the field out. And then when we had one basically the next year and it didn't do anything, it definitely soured that for me. But this is where I think the ACO would have to essentially, by doing this, admit that obviously the Reka is the fastest car by a wide margin in that class, and that it really, to try to advantage the other manufacturers in that class, they're doing this thing to essentially eliminate the Eureka from being in that category, which again gives the nod that the Eureka is the fastest. So to them, it would be, well, if anybody did want to run that Dallara next year, then they wouldn't be able to, because, now we just admitted that it's not a really good car, but everybody knows it's not. So that's where I'm just saying, we're already to the point where we are absolutely the point where no one wants to run anything other than a Reka. Why not actually lean into that mindset and just remove the Eureka from that class, or at least hamper it to enough where the Dallara and Ligier and maybe Riley can literally, potentially walk away with that, even with an AM driver being in the same AM driver being in both chassis, I would say.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree with that. I'd love to see it. It's definitely not going to happen because, Frenchies being Frenchies, but I'd like to see that. Are there actually any Riley P2 chassis that exist anymore that aren't Mazdas?
Cody Ware's got them.
Why?
Ware Racing, I should say.
Why?
Because they're American. They're an American NASCAR start and park team where they just show up to get the entry fee and then run away. So it goes to their racing business strategy, shall we say?
Fair enough. LMP3. How do you stop this United train? They won 3 out of the 4 races. They took too many out of all of the podiums. How do you stop them? How can it be done?
Can I answer with a "get good, son"? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, fair. That is an appropriate response.
You find the hauler that's hauling the Ligiers for United Autosports, and you run it off the road. Would that work too?
Damn. Yeah, I mean, it would certainly.
I don't know. I'm just saying. Unless there's a cataclysmic Mother Nature event that like lightning strikes their hauler on the way to the track. I mean, I don't know. They have the best, in my opinion, right now that we could see chassis that's in the new LMP3 squad.
Yep,
I mean,
the Ligier.
We'll see. Yeah, and they have so much experience. Their driver lineups are very, very seasoned when it comes to this category. And their experience in all the other categories that they run, essentially for prototypes, lends them a huge advantage over a lot of these other teams, especially when we're kind of seeing everybody be like on the back foot with these two race weekend, championship rounds that are concluded in 3 weeks. I mean, they just have so much baked in advantage to their team, and then to have 3 entries is a lot of data to be spread between those 3 cars too.
Yes, it is a wealth of information, a wealth of driving talent, and a wealth of crew talent as well. So they took 8 of the 12 available podiums throughout the season. The only race that they didn't win was the race where they had 2 cars expire within the first 4 laps. They have 6 auto entries to Le Mans. They are basically the evil empire at this point, and we're kind of okay with it. Like, they are exploiting the, AM driver, silver rank driver thing, where they have, future professionals in Wayne Boyd, and they didn't actually have Phil Hansen. I'm not sure if he's still an AM driver, but they are able to promote young up and coming drivers into silver rated seats and put them alongside established motorsport. Established experience heads in motorsport, and they have just done an incredible job of picking apart where others haven't been able to.
Yeah, and I mean, they're all doing it. This is all in-house. This isn't like, G-Drive where they're kind of courting different professional teams to come in and run their equipment for them. They're doing all of this. There's a bunch of solid groundwork that's behind these entries and behind these race victories and championship victories, where they're, it's not coming from somewhere else. It's coming from United Autosports. And I mean, they are absolutely the big looming empire over LMP2 and LMP3 at the moment. But I mean, look, that's how ebb and flows work, and they have absolutely deserved all the credit for that success and domination. Really,
they have had the most ridiculous 18 months. I don't remember anyone, not even Audi in the peak of the LMP1 days, having that level of dominance in a class in ACO spec racing. I think they went almost the entirety of 2020 undefeated in ELMS and WEC in LMP2. They won, 5 races in a row at Spa-Francorchamps or something mental. We made mention, they took home 1 and 2 in the ELMS championship. They won Le Mans. They won the ELMS P3 class. They've won the Asian Le Mans Series P3 class. Not only that, I think they even placed 1-2. I'm just going to check that now to see whether or not they even placed 1-2-3, because if they did, that is kind of ridiculous.
I mean, the last time I would think is like maybe 2011, 2012 with the HPD ARX. I think it was 03 with Muscle Milk Racing in the ALMS American Le Mans Series, when it was basically kind of a 2-car class between them and Dyson Racing in that Lola. But I mean, they were just so dominant. And I mean, when you didn't have those international squads that showed up for, Petit and Sebring, and they were essentially just running away from everything. And just for the, that can't even be a comparison just based on the championships that United Autosports are entering. They're extremely competitive. I mean, like, if they didn't show up for this, we would be talking probably about a bunch of different winners, bunch of different podiums. It would look there'd just be a different look to everything for each race, I felt like. But it just speaks to the absolute level of dominance that they've been able to at least show on a European level, and now they've absolutely segued that to just running away with everything in the Asian Law Series, especially.
And on that as well, it surprises me that they've managed to uphold this level of dominance in a spec-ish class. We're talking about LMP2 and LMP3, which are technically spec, and remain consistent, remain so consistent. Because you would think in classes with AM drivers, with variable strategies, with spec machinery, that eventually they would slip up. But they just haven't. They just haven't for 18 months. It's just an oppressive run of success in the best way possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, like, that's where it's not frustrating, but it's kind of like, oh, okay, there, it's another United Autosports. It's almost like not necessarily feeling like a dread, but you're like a feeling of inevitability with some of this. But still, with just to even say that in endurance racing, and with how LMP2 and LMP3 are set up to be so competitive, that's an incredible achievement. And again, as much as I would want to be ticked off that we're not having, that we're having domination like this in a category that should not be having a ton of domination like this, it just speaks more to the caliber of that team and how good they are right now.
Absolutely. And it does kind of mask the conversation about, what is the best P3 chassis at the moment? Is it the Ligier? Is it the Duquesne? Is it the Ginetta? When you have a team of such quality just kind of running away from things, it does make that conversation difficult to have. But we're going to have it anyway. There was one Duquesne in the Asian Le Mans series run by DKR Engineering. They showed flashes of brilliance with a few good runs. They ended up finishing the championship in 6th after a DNF in race 1. The Ginetta had a torrid time, let's be honest. ARC Bratislava struggled through the pair of weekends with technical problems and issues and bits and bobs and new car teething stuff. This is also the first completed series that we've had the new Duquesne without the ballast for missing the homologation date. Did we learn anything in the LMP3 discussion, like, at all?
Not a ton. If I could take anything, the Ligier just seems to have improved on the straight line speed, and it still seems to be the superior car in low to mid speed corners. And when we talked about the old iterations of the P3s, Ligier to the now Duquesne, there was that difference between those the quartering speeds and just the strengths for the Ligier versus the straight line speed of the Duquesne. What we're going to just continue to call it, even though it wasn't that back then.
It was the Norma.
Norma, yeah. But it's hard to say for sure how the Duquesne's going to perform. It just definitely didn't have the data that Ligier clearly does. And I mean, for all of their woes in LMP2, they certainly know how to build a really good LMP3 chassis. And it will be interesting, especially at ELMS, to see more of those Duquesnes show up and to see how they actually do with maybe a little bit better preparedness and maybe slightly better equipment too, with some drivers that might be a little bit more comfortable with it. But it looks like the Ligier should probably, I mean, it's hard to say now it's the Ligier considering how many were entered and where they finished, and especially with United Autosports basically being the flagship for that car, that they aren't the best. The interesting, just as you said too, with how much teething problems the Ginetta had versus the Duquesne, that yes, probably they did have more running, but they were also a single car entry for this championship essentially,
and they were at least able to kind of be where I would peg them if they were a single car entry versus a complete fleet of Ligiers that they're running against. So the Ginetta definitely has a lot of work to do before they pick it up in ELMS.
Well, it was the competition debut for the Ginetta. Let's not forget about that. The Duquesne, I think DKR Engineering, Lawrence Hoare, and the other driver whose name is just escaping me at the moment, I just had it in front of me, Jean Glereau, they were in the mix, especially in race 2 at Dubai. They chose an alternate strategy option and really added a lot of complexity to the race, and could have run away with a victory there had things fallen their way. So the Duquesne, I'm not that worried about the Duquesne's pace. I think running on from the Norma, now that they've gotten rid of that weight, fingers, arms, legs, toes, and eyes crossed, that a few more quality teams jump into that chassis. I think that is, of course, the problem when you start getting these... what's the word I'm looking for? The convergence onto a particular chassis, is that you start to lose quality teams in other chassis to stop making comparisons. I think, with the weight of numbers and with the Ligier at the moment, it is hard to make those comparisons, but I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe Graf or maybe Nielsen jump back into a Duquesne, perhaps. The Ginetta, it's a gorgeous piece of machinery, but it needs to be put in the hands of a better set of drivers. Not saying anything against the ARC Bratislava team, but they're not United Autosports, and with a more comprehensive lineup of cars before we can properly make comparisons, because it did not look quick. Even when it was on track. I mean, Charlie Robertson did the best he could with what he had, but it did not cover itself in glory.
No, they seem to have issues. I mean, not necessarily where they did, but it looked like that car was still going through teething issues, like shakedown issues.
Yeah.
Even when they're getting to the grid and that kind of stuff. Like it looked like it was still in shakedown mode, which is unfortunate to see. Just from, where I think that not to say that they should have been having all this testing, because who knows all the COVID stuff. And again, the wrinkle with this being that it's a British-run operation, so a lot of this is kind of, tied behind your back. I mean, the whole Portimao stuff with the WEC and getting pushed back, a lot of that too had to do with the actual restrictions from UK residents to get to Portugal, and the vice versa, Portugal putting restrictions on UK residents to get there. So there's a lot of maybe moving parts with the COVID stuff that maybe we aren't factoring in as much with this, but just in terms of the eye test, it definitely looked like they were behind in terms of their development for the car, and which is a shame because it's a different looking concept from the Duquesne Norma and the Ligier, where they kind of had that central
pointy,
essentially kind of pointy nose, and they're kind of doing more of what you would see from like the Toyota and some of the LMP1Hs way back when, which just kind of has that overhang for the entire sweeping nose of the car. Yeah. So I love the different look of the Ginetta compared to both of the other two cars. I just hope that they can get that testing done to get it competitive.
Yeah, and
also the name of it. I mean, the G61-LT-P3 15-Evo Nissan, like, so that's a nice it rolls off the
mouthful
tongue
of gravel you got there.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. Just to round off on that point on the Ginetta as well, looking at the best lap times throughout the race. So this is going to, traffic is going to play into this, drivers are going to play into this, whatever. It was consistently 2 to 3 seconds off the best pace of the rest of the field, which put it more in the GT field throughout the races. So that's kind of the sort of level of pace that we're looking at for the Ginetta here. Yeah. We'll move on to GT. There was a lot of talking points in GT. First one I want to talk about. We talked about it briefly. How did having the Gulf 12 hour and the Dubai 24 hour play into the considerations for the teams? The Porsches were especially strong because they have very recent experience at these tracks. Was the BOP off in those instances because of the recent running with those teams? Because it seemed that the Porsches had more of an advantage than they possibly should have had, even with their experience, at least at Dubai.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that just because they seem like they could kind of flip another switch and kind of drive off.
Mm.
And two, with it being, there it's inviting the argument. So whether or not that the BOP was maybe slightly off, it just didn't look that great considering the previous outings and and just kind of how everything lined up for that. So I mean, I think there probably was some BOP issues, but then at the same time, how much of that would have still been something that would have been nullified anyway by GPX and other teams like that having had that experience and having had run that to kind of try to translate some of that information to the ACO's Asian Law Series. So I would say that it could have been better. But at the same time, I think you couldn't really hamstrung this too much, and really they're still trying to go off of BOP tables and do this that way. So it's difficult. I don't think they nailed it quite right, but I think it was close.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
Keep in mind that this is the only ACO series that we generally cover here that uses GT3 machinery. Is that something that would have played into it? GT3 is a much broader range of machinery than GTE, which the ACO is used to dealing with. Could that have had some sort of effect?
Yeah, yes, but at the same time, they're also doing that with the Mans series, the
Michelin Le Mans Cup. Yep.
Yeah, so I feel like they could have a little bit of wiggle room that way, but at the same time, no. I feel like they should have had a more kind of even approach with that, and or at least when they went with the BOP, because they made a BOP change after the first two races.
Yes, they made a BOP change after the first race. They added 30 kilograms.
Oh, sorry, yeah, and that almost didn't seem like it was enough either.
Yeah, so, exactly.
And the BMWs were a fair bit off. That I could tell. The Aston Martins looked like they were pretty solid, and Mercedes were pretty good. Same with the Ferraris. It looked like everybody else was okay, but the Porsches just had a leg up on everybody else. The BMW seemed to be wallowing in sorrow back there. So in terms of having it very even, no, I don't think that they got it right there. But I think with hopefully more adjusting, and again, we're like that's where I would like to see more of the auto BOP show up here, or at least have a little bit more of information as to, okay, why they made that change or why the decision. Again, it's French ACO, so we're not going to get that. But in a perfect world, I would love to see that, so we could at least look at more to see where the Porsche truly had more of the pace advantage, and even where they had that disadvantage placed on them, they still were able to overcome that. So I think that's a question that I would love to have answered, which I know won't.
Yeah, and that's the dream, right? That is the dream. Actual open communication about the decisions that the ACO is making.
Yeah. Now I'm realizing how much of a fever dream that I just spoke of, but still, it's wishful thinking, that's for sure. But I think for how it could have gone, it could have been worse. But yeah, the Porsches just had a crazy leg up on the rest of the GT3 field,
and that in part might be due to the condensed schedule as well. The fact that you had so few opportunities to make changes because the cars were on track so very frequently, but not for long enough to make those changes stick. So, the Porsche did have a little bit of a leg up that couldn't be entirely worked out over the course of the season. A bit of a different tack here with this next question. I made mention when we were talking about the Abu Dhabi Race 2, the Yas Marina Race 2, which, by the way, I still think had the best BOP of the lot. It took them to the very last race to get it, but they did get it right in the end. There's a lot of complexities around the minimum pit stop time, the 110-second pit stops, the mandation for 3 of them. How do you feel about that in racing in general? We've seen this in Blancpain, formerly Blancpain, currently SRO. We've seen this in long-time races like the Nürburgring 24 Hours. They have minimum pit stop times. We've seen this now in the LMP3 class for a number of seasons, now in the GT class as well. Is it a good idea for Pro-Am racing, or is it punishing excellence? That is the question I want to pose to you.
It would only be punishing excellence by way of restricting better crews from completing pit stops faster. I can understand and
safety aspect of it, where we want everybody to make sure that everything's done correctly, and that you don't, these amp drivers, which could be slower in terms of getting in the car, getting themselves ready, that is a discrepancy that they can try to nullify by this. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, it does feel like they are limiting a bit of excellence, or at least they're trying to punish that a little bit. However, I think, again, if this was more, not necessarily reactive, but it was more like a productive, hey, like, well, this is our minimum times that we set. Not necessarily where you can prove to us, but we're gonna take video samples of stuff just to see, like, if more than half of all the teams are spending 5 seconds basically sitting there twiddling their thumbs, and it's, they can definitely check to, not necessarily check to see how everything is going in terms of a good pit stop, but just the average amount of stops for all these teams and drivers. Maybe then they can adjust that, and and where it can be baked in, where they're going to go, okay, well, for after each round, we'll assess pit stop times and to see kind of where teams finished their stops versus the minimum time, and see if that needs adjusted. I think that would be an easier pill to swallow than how it is right now, which is like, we determined that everybody we should be this slow because of reasons. Yeah. And therefore, it does remove part of it. However, again, you could go for safety, cost cutting, enticing, poor AM drivers and teams to stay in these championships because of their unknown disadvantage with that. So it's tough, because I definitely don't like it, but I understand it.
Yeah, at least. I think that's a great way of putting it. I would agree that I don't like it, and I especially despise it in the pro classes of SRO racing. Like, at that point where this is the peak of GT3 racing, this is the best crews and outfits doing the best that they can do, and you're enforcing a minimum on them. That to me is stupid. But in this context where you have Pro-Am teams, Pro-Am outfits, that makes more sense to me, and it did produce some decent strategies. I kind of took it upon myself while watching these races to basically do the pit stop updates on Twitter for, like, who had managed to get their pit stops, their, like, mandatory pit stops done, when they'd done them, how close they'd gotten to that mark, who had gone under that mark. Because remember, if you go under the mark, if you don't get 3 110 second pit stops done before the last half hour of the race, you get a stop and go penalty for the time difference. So if that's 1 second, congratulations, you got a drive through penalty. And there are a few teams who ran into that. But what impressed me while looking at all of that was how many teams got it exactly right. And I tweeted about this in the second race at Dubai. I put up a picture, which I'm just going to quickly link to the live chat now. Which has got no one in it, which is a bit of a shame. But that was the last pit stop in the Dubai Race 2, and that is literally 20 cars within 2 seconds of that minimum pit stop time. So those teams had it nailed down. I think it's punishing excellence in a pro category, and in a pro-am category, it's a better idea. I don't want to say it's a great idea, but it's a better idea. And teams can work around that. Like, as I said, in the As Marina race too, Car Guy Racing got all their pit stops out of the way in the first 90 minutes. So they had a free run to do whatever they wanted in the rest of the race, and it came back in their favor. Like, it is possible to work around these things when the strategy is correct. And I think Car Guy in particular, there was a few teams who did that to great effect in that last race.
Yeah, and so my only addition to this would potentially be subtracting it from 3 to 2, and really just going to the logic that we'd have 1 to 2 AM drivers, something like that, or essentially 2 AM drivers at the most, and that would allow for them to essentially be able to either start the race, finish the race, or basically take a stint in the middle of the race and have that time for either safety or just for competition wise, where they're not necessarily disadvantaged just by them being amateur drivers and not having the professional experience of driver changes and just getting into the car, getting into the setup. So I think maybe
3 it would be too much, especially for a 4-hour race.
Yeah.
Even though those stint lengths are under an hour, but still it takes a little bit of the edge off of it. And I think if they went to 2, it's still a speed bump for all the teams, but it's more of one where they can fold that into more like honest strategy that they would have anyway with these AM drivers. And I think that might be easier. But then, again, the explanation really from the ACO is just kind of for more of the competition base and whatnot, and they don't really expound too much on that. And I would just love to have more clarification as to like why not 2 instead of 3, that kind of thing. But
that's actually
that would probably be the only modification I'd make.
That's a great point. I want to see that. That is the perfect response. Well done, Cookie. You are a wildfire. Wild card. On the note of strategy options, GPX learnt a very valuable lesson in race 1 of the season, where they front-loaded their professional driver time, built up a massive lead, and then watched it slowly ebb away as the AM driver got chased down and then pressured into a mistake. So they learnt that lesson from race 1, made that adjustment for race 2, and won race 2. Is that a lesson that other teams should have taken note of, especially considering the safety car periods in race 3? Race 4, rather. Where do you slot your bronze or silver driver in that mix in order to maximize your racing performance? Because we saw some teams put their bronze driver in to start the race, and that worked sometimes, and that didn't work sometimes. I think Takeshi Kimura for Car Guy, he got involved in an accident in the first race because he was the one in the car, and got caught up in something that another driver may not have, and then they were a lap down before they even knew it. On the other hand, come race 4, they were the ones best placed with the best drivers in the car because they'd gotten their bronze driver out of the way early. How do you strategize around a bronze driver or an AM driver in a 4-hour race?
Yeah, and really, I think that's the last thing you said is the kicker, is the 4-hour race stint, where I think that it's difficult to really try to, and especially with this series being very amateur focused and not necessarily being like an ELMS caliber of professional drivers and teams, where their potential for safety cars and the field neutralization is so high that it almost doesn't make sense to leave your AMs for the end. Just from the simple fact that if there is a mid-race safety car, a lot of the advantage that you've just naturally built in gets removed. Now at Le Mans, if that was 4 hours, a 4-hour race, that kind of thing, and the Le Mans Cup, then that's a different story. We can talk about maybe, sending them out, the professional drivers out to do that. And, famously with Ben Keating doing that in the did win but didn't win for GT in that GTM, not race victory for the field bladder. That's what they did. And Ben, just being Ben, was able to really, maintain gaps and almost not necessarily pull gaps, but he showed his strength to hold their lead and to hold their advantage that they had by building that up with all the pro drivers first. So I would almost say it's almost like a Ben Keating rule right now, and GPX tried to do that at the first race. So, but I think that for a 4-hour race in this championship, it's a way more safe and less risky strategy to just put the AM driver in first, and then again, like race 4 was, that first hour had about 40 minutes of safety car and field neutralization, so you really got a lot of the bulk of the AM driver's time in the car out of the way to begin with, and you saw that GT cars take real advantage of that.
Yeah, it's the Core Autosport strategy. Remember when Core Autosport did that in LMP2 in IMSA back in 2017?
Yep. Yes, I do.
They got
Bennett driving like 10, 15, 20 minutes, and a yellow full course yellow comes out, and they throw Colin Braun in to do literally the rest of the race, pretty much.
The one that I remember specifically in all this was Laguna Seca. Remember that awful Laguna Seca race where there was a crash on the start and then a crash on the restart, and there was literally 45 minutes of yellow flag racing, and John Bennett, they were going to go green that next lap around, and so Bennett just slowed to a stop in front of the pit lane to make sure that he completed
like
the drive
20
time.
seconds.
Yeah,
it was amazing. It was amazing, kind of just again wrinkling the regulations to your benefit, and I loved it. I absolutely loved that.
Yeah, that was great. They finished second that race. That was a race that Mazda should have won, but once again, just sucked.
Yeah, with all the Cadillacs nuking themselves, they had a perfect opportunity to do it and didn't.
Yeah.
So.
Whoops. Yes, Mazda, the best blow up. Now
we could talk smack about them since they're not going to be continuing in LMDH. So,
well, like, complete sidebar from the Asian Le Mans series. I get the romanticism of Mazda at Le Mans, sure, well, and Mazda in racing and whatever, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. They've been around IMSA for ages. Their program achieved nothing. They had opportunities to race wins that they threw away. They never won a endurance monument because they couldn't last long enough. They started with Speed Source, who were not a good team, and they lost every race that they did in that one season where they had a car that wasn't the Speed Source. The diesel, in the pits. It just kept happening, and I don't understand why people look at them with such romanticism because they were just kind of crap. Anyway, that's an entire another podcast we can leave for another time.
But they won the 12 Hours of Sebring in 2020. Flood, didn't you know that? Didn't you understand that, like, after racing there for almost a decade and basically failing epically in every way possible, they finally won the race?
They won one race. Of course, you're the one that bring that up because you're a Toyota fan.
6 Hour of the Glen. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, see, and the last thing I'll say is, like, it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be real weird when all of a sudden you'll have, like, sports car fans, like the younger sports car fans will be like, Mazda was super cool, but I mean, is it though?
No.
And like, and then like their Le Mans win in 1991, and then it's like all the little caveats that we just don't talk about with how, like, that car was essentially like BOP'd really, really, really well for that race, and that you had a lot of kind of really terrible failures from Mercedes and some of the Porsches to basically just allow that Mazda to kind of like just stroll up to the victory for that. Right. So we've given it a pass because it sounds brilliant and it's a rotary engine and it's Mazda and that livery is amazing. But when we look now at the IMSA stuff, it's kind of soured it a bit because you're like, Mazda, like, I mean, can you just try to maybe win stuff? I mean, like, you did win that one time with the car that we really like, but how about now? Can you do it now? And it's just, it's disappointment incarnate.
Sorry if you were planning on listening to the Asian Le Mans series review. We just kind of gone off track here. Speaking of going off track, Race Control called in Race 4 Optimum Motorsports to redress a pass on the Precourt Herberth number 99 car after it came out of the pits. Was that the correct call? Sorry to bring us back on topic here. We didn't actually ever see the pass. We just heard that it was outside of the track limits. That ended up forcing a redress from Optimum Motorsport, which meant that when Car Guy took their splash and dash, they came out a good 5 seconds ahead, where it was looking to be much, much closer than that. Your thoughts, opinions, and everything, please. Just if it helps, the pass was made about 10 minutes before the penalty was administered. So they had about a 5-second gap on the Herberth Motorsport car before being told to redress that position.
Yeah, I mean, I think the penalty is fine. I think the it's unfortunate that, but at the same time there's track limits and and that kind of stuff for a reason. I'm not 100% a huge fan of that, but these are the rules, and I don't want to fight them as much as I probably should. But no, I think that this seems to be kind of not necessarily a nagging issue, but for race directions in general and race stewards in general, I think that should absolutely be more of a priority. And I don't know if they ever have actual race steward luncheons and or conferences where all the race stewards every year meet and party and talk about all those stupid drivers that they had to penalize. But that should be addressed. That should be a 1 hour platform discussion where everybody sits and discusses the importance to, if you're going to make a decision like that, do it as soon as you can. And if it's not, then there needs to be some form of a redress, or maybe you got us kind of thing that needs to happen when it comes to that stuff, is particularly because that, once you get 10 minutes past, there's a lot that can happen in that time, a lot of traffic that can get in the way.
and that's an extreme way to essentially dole out a penalty like that. There's got to be some alternative way once you hit a certain time after it. And I mean, this has been a problem for in IMSA, Formula One. I mean, you name a series, and we've seen penalties doled out way, way, way after.
Yeah.
That totally ruins races just for a simple mistake that, like, I guess they should have known but didn't. And I mean, it's hard to put that so much on the teams and drivers to the point that you need to punish them like that. So
and keep in mind as well, this was in the very latter stage of the race, which means it was in complete darkness. So it turns out I led you a bit astray. It wasn't for an off-track pass; it was for avoidable contact in the pass. So that was
early, wasn't that? Wasn't that like within the first hour? Or was that right at the end?
This was just as the Porsche came out of the pit. So the sequence of events was the Optimum Motorsport took their last stop. It was the mandated time stop, so it was 110 seconds. Preco Herberth Motorsport took their stop. They didn't have a time mandate, so it was a splash and dash. They came out on very old tyres, so they were just ahead, like talking 1 second ahead. Passes made, assisted with contact. 10 minutes down the road, Kessel Racing make their last stop. At the same time, Race Control says you've got to redress that pass for the McLaren. They had built a 10-second gap in that period, so it was... A 10-second gap is certainly not insignificant, and that could have, not saying it would have, but it certainly could have changed the overall result with where those cars had come out on track. I think you make a very, very good point there, that when these incidents happen, the Race Control needs to be on it, and they need to do it quickly. And there is a bit of a double-edged sword in that respect, because you can end up just giving positions back willy-nilly that you might not have needed to, because you're assuming a penalty is coming. That used to be something that happened a lot in the Supercars Championship in Australia. You know, you'd see a pass made that was kind of 50-50, and then rather than getting up the road and then having to give it back, the driver would just give it back immediately, which, you know, is admirable in one respect, but it did in the end cause quite a big accident at Bathurst, quite a famous accident, where a car was trying to redress, returning to the circuit, trying to redress, got involved with another car that was trying to make a pass at the same time, and calamity happened. I'm sure if I say Jamie Whincup, Scott McLaughlin, Garth Tander, there's a few people in the audience who know exactly what I'm talking about. It's tough, because you can't expect Race Control to have all the information straight away and make those decisions straight away. But 10 minutes is not an insignificant amount of time, and 10 seconds is a not insignificant gap to then be telling to give up. So, yeah, I don't know. We never actually saw the pass, by the way. We never actually saw the contact on the broadcast, so it's hard to have an opinion on that.
Yeah. And that's, again, where it's like, as much as I have an issue with how the time length, or the time frame, at least when the penalties were issued. I don't have a problem with the penalties being issued, for that reason. So it's just kind of it's more of like a do better governing body, which is a little bit of a juxtaposition, I guess, from where they're essentially telling the race teams to do, or drivers to do better. So I think that. But again, this is not a problem that is solely inherent with just sports car racing or just the ACO. This is a problem that affects the SRO and IMSA and the FIA and all of those other series and whatnot, that just crazy time lengths between sometimes penalties. I mean, there's a few Formula One races and issues where that happened, and it was like almost half the race had already ran before a penalty was issued for a thing that happened at the start or something like that. And it was like, come on. I mean, there's definitely a time and place for it and whatnot. But at the same time, like, if somebody got an advantage and you didn't punish them in a certain time, then I don't see the need to really do that.
It allows too many variables to continue to change the race once that position has been changed. And like, we have seen great use of penalties like this in ACO racing before. I seem to recall the 2016 Fuji race where we had the G Drive and RLR M Sport machines very late in the race for P2 honours, pass off the circuit limits. It was one lap. You've got to give it back. And that's a good example of it being used correctly. But yeah, it's a bit of a... you'd hate to see them get the wrong decision, but you want the right decision quickly, right?
Yep,
otherwise, just punish everything post race and then just turn the results where the results are made up and the penalties don't matter.
Or just some diminishing returns thing. If by X time length, based on the length of the race itself, then then X action cannot be applied. It has to go through Y, or or something where that it's still inhibiting potential advantages that were taken on track, but it's not done in such a severe way after the ebb and flow of the race has already began. Because honestly, then these teams would and I get the argument too, where you could go, okay, well then these teams then have to, it's more of a self-policing thing than too, because they don't want this to be looming over them, but at the same time it's like I don't, that doesn't sit well with me either. So
and to be fair, the only result that it could have drastically changed was the overall victory. I mean, the difference in strategy for the Porsche and the McLaren in particular, and the Ferrari behind, the Ferrari and the McLaren were on fresh tyres, the Porsche was very much not, so it was unlikely that the Porsche was going to be able to hold on for the remainder of the race. But what it did do was it definitely stilted the McLaren's and Ben Barnicoat's chance to make a push for the victory. And that's the prevailing issue here. Which is unfortunate, but in the end, we still got a cracking race out of it anyway. Now, we got 15 minutes left before we should really head off, because that's 2 hours is almost too long to be talking about sports cars. Drivers that impressed you throughout these 4 races. Who have you got?
I'm relying a little bit on some of your list here, but I mean, it's kind of some usual suspects that we've seen, with Michael Jensen and Ben Barnicoat. But then we've had some really standout drivers as well. I mean, we've had, Sean Galeo coming in, and then Hasberg as well, Maldonado, and then everybody would kind of would look at that and be like, well, Pastor, and it's like, Manuel Maldonado. He did very well. I thought that was a really good performance as well. And we saw some good GT drivers, in there too. So honestly, it was better than I thought for driver talent that I wasn't kind of expecting. And we saw some names that we weren't normally used to seeing at some of the fronts of these of the classes, really. Yeah. And that was awesome to see. And I thought that there was a breadth of pretty good talent that was able to show itself in those 4 races. Yeah,
I think particularly those drivers that G-Drive had, that they kind of pulled from F2 or F3. Yes. We talked at length in the preview about Franco Colapinto, and he just blew us away in the entire... Yep. He was driver of the series for me.
I would. Yeah. I mean, I would say in terms of he had the best overall 4 races, or 4 series races. I would say for sure.
Yeah. Even Yefei in the other car, we mentioned Sean Galeo. He basically exists for the redemption arc. I want to talk more about Arjun Maini, the best driver in the Racing Team India car. Now, I remember seeing Maini in ELMS. He took on a drive at the Bend, driving the RLR M Sport car in the LMP2 AM category last year, and was the quickest LMP2 AM car by a long way whenever he got in the car. And so to see him in a P2 car running against other P2 cars and eclipsing them, like that battle after the safety car in race 2 at Dubai, he was putting in some work. So keep a pin in that name. That one's going to come up more in the future. And Malte Jacobsen in the... not the DK engineering car. The other one that was interesting that we didn't get to see a lot of, because when he wasn't in the car, it was nowhere. The RLRM Sport car, he was incredible. They put him in at the start of every race, and he would just go, and he was gone. So Malte Jacobsen, keep an eye on that name for the future.
The Arjun Mani, I remember him famously for that 2018 rant in F2 where he was very upset at his team vocally on the radio. So I'm glad to see him kind of getting his feet under him and, having more of a quiet, championship run with G-Drive. Granted, I'm sure that is, the situation in 2018 in F2 is entirely different from how the G-Drive team and...
he was in RCI.
Yes. Yep. Between that and now it's different. But at the same time, it's it's good to see him perform well because he absolutely had talent, and honestly, I don't disagree with his points in 2018 either. So
well, okay, see, I have absolutely no context on that because I've not watched feeder series Formula One. I started watching it last year because there was less motorsport to watch.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair. It was more or less just calling out the team for not essentially resolving issues with engine management and mapping at France, actually, at that French round. So he was vocally upset on the radio, swearing, and it wasn't a good look at the time. Let's just say that. But he's made his redemption mark.
Awesome. I just also want to just put a note next to Patrick Kujala. As I mentioned earlier, every single time he was in that car, in the number 66 Rinaldi racing car, something was happening. And it was either him blitzing through the field and putting everyone under pressure, or getting penalties for track limit abuse, or making contact with someone. He was the Cookie Monster FL of that series, so it was an absolute wild card. What about drivers that disappointed you?
The weird revolving door that was Phoenix Racing's pro drivers, they disappointed. I think that I was expecting more from Van der Linde and team, and they kind of didn't to a certain extent. And so with your notes that you have, I definitely agree there. Galil had a really horrific first race, for...
First two races.
First two races, yeah, but definitely the first race was pretty bad. And left for a good redemption arc, but that's where I would definitely agree with you. He wouldn't be a driver of the championship. That's for sure for me. Those I would say the pairing of Kelvin van der Linde and Nicky Thiem kind of in that Phoenix Racing pro driver lineup was a little bit more that I would have expected from them that they showed.
They were just kind of anonymous.
Yeah, they were there.
Yeah, and surely the pair of them debuts in P2 machinery. Sure, that's fine. I totally get that. But also, it was Colapinto's debut in P2 machinery. It was Rui Pinto de Andrade's debut in P2 machinery. It was Yifei's debut in P2 machinery. These guys absolutely blitzed Phoenix Racing. So, I just expected more, to be fair.
Yeah. No, and for good reason too. I mean, they both are pretty high caliber GT drivers, and it seems like a lot. I mean, if we want to even base anything off of Nick Tandy, that Porsche squad, that there is a ability for really good pro factory GT drivers to step up into prototype equipment and to perform well. So maybe that was Phoenix Racing setup that really didn't lend them any favors, and it was maybe more set up for the AMs. Yeah. But both of them were kind of just there. Yeah.
I also want to just throw into the mix maybe Nielsen Racing, last season's reigning champions. They never really got going. They had that one properly good result where they were 1-2 in race 3 of the season. But, they seem to struggle to find consistent pace. I mean, they did take the only non-United Autosports podiums as well, but fourths and fifths and sixths and sevenths, they weren't really where you would expect them to be. And also, the GT reigning champion, where have they gone? I had them in front of my eyes and now they're gone. I've forgotten who they are. They were literally right in front of me.
The Precoat Herberth?
No. The reigning champion, Hub Auto Racing. There we go. Sorry for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, again, a team that just never really got going. They had a suspension failure in race 1. They had a spin that took them out of position in race 2. They weren't really in the mix in Yas Marina. You would have expected a lineup of Marcielo, Gomez, and Talbot, who's a pretty accomplished Australian AM racer, to have a bit more behind them, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, factor too with that being really the only Mercedes there, that could have factored into it a bit, but that's still such a stable and base chassis. Granted, that is year sort of 2 of that new Evo Mercedes, bodywork and that stuff. So maybe we still have some, balance issues, just teething things here or there to fix. But I think that there should be an argument for that Mercedes to be higher up in the finishing order for all 4 of those races, and it really just never found its way up there.
Yeah, it ended up finishing the championship in 7th with the best result of 4th. So, not really anything to write home about, unfortunately. Unfortunately for the team, because that is a really, really good team. And they, after their difficulties at Le Mans, I would have liked to have seen them have another crack at it, but it looks like they will not be able to, unfortunately. Yeah. Cool. I think that's as far as we can talk about the season from a racing perspective. What about an entertainment and a broadcast perspective? We have been very pointedly avoiding this discussion for the entire podcast, but the broadcast has room for improvement. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
I think part of the reason some people found it very difficult to track and difficult to watch, myself included, to be fair, was that when things were happening on track, we weren't getting pictures of them. And that was a consistent problem, especially at Dubai. They seemed to get a bit of a better handle of it at Abu Dhabi, but I'm trying to be nice, I'm trying to measure my words here, but it wasn't great.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest too, in that a lot of the ACO products aren't necessarily the greatest anyway. I mean, they do have the ability. I mean, from what we saw in Le Mans last year, when they were opening up a lot of their behind-the-scenes stuff, is that they have the technology and they have the manpower to absolutely deliver a good product. We have it. We also have a lot of money, French money. But like, yeah, I mean, it was odd because, I mean, for one, I can understand that there's not probably going to be those staff that's probably at the track themselves. So you might have some delay in terms of, hey, let's switch to this, let's switch to that. And there might be a less organic, part to play that you can see translated into the TV product. But at the same time, it's just, there wasn't any at all. And it just felt like, okay, like it felt like some programmer was working full time, and then he had a separate screen on the, like across the hall, and he would like be working, and then he would just quickly grind this over and, use the mouse for the Asian Le Mans Series feed and, live feed. Okay, well, let's switch to this car. Okay, let me go back to this thing.
Yeah.
Or like it was like you writing up, mid-race reports, being on Twitter, then also at the same time managing the, which live feed direction you go with the actual broadcast feed. So
yeah.
It felt weird, especially too because they had GG and Ollie Gavin on site. Or at least it appeared to be so. Maybe they were not there either.
They were absolutely on site because they had drivers in the booth post race. So they absolutely were on site. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was weird that they went to that length, but then they just didn't have a race director who seemed to know what motorsport was, because he just kept getting like lost in the gaze of some of the headlights or taillights or something, or maybe he just loved looking at the cars a lot and didn't want to cut away to other cars.
Yeah.
It was weird that they didn't have the capability of, if they missed something, to go back and look at it. And then if they didn't even get it anyway, they didn't really try to recap or try to fill gaps. It just was like, this is what we got. Have fun.
Yeah, it was very peculiar, especially talking about the replays. There were replays that very clearly did not scroll back far enough. And, you were like, okay, so this is the aftermath, sure, but you've certainly got what happened before, because we can see it in the shot when you're starting it. So that to me was especially peculiar. It seemed that there was some sort of disconnect between the guys in the booth, the guys in the production truck, and what was happening on track. I recall on more than one occasion actually trying to get the series' attention on Twitter to try and get them to follow something. It actually worked in the last race. They actually started talking about GT when I'd said, hey, you guys should talk about GT. But it was a consistent problem, unfortunately, throughout the series. How do you reckon not Goodwin, we know Goodwin's good win. What about Oliver Gavin? His debut in commentary, I didn't think he did a bad job.
No, there was definitely parts where it was, his demeanor is slightly different, and he might take lessons from these first 4 races if this is something that he wants to, lean into with a trajectory into commentary, for that, not necessarily we have to have a little bit more pip in his step, but like, where that he's just maybe broadcasting a little bit more excited talk as a color commentator.
Yeah, getting into that presenter voice.
Right, yeah, and to that end too, it's not that you have to be over the top and all that stuff, but this stuff you're trying to translate the excitement of this race and the uniqueness of this series and this championship to a international audience that either A, has already seen a bunch of endurance racing before or has never seen it before, and you're trying to kind of interject your own experience and your own passions into kind of this sport to really hook other people and to really provide a unique experience for these people watching and listening to this. So I feel like that's where the baseline should be for this. And, I can't fault him for the effort that he gave because it was decent. It just, it lacked a little bit of an oomph, and, I can't fault him too much for that, for this kind of being his first outing in this series.
I would not at all be surprised to learn that the schedule and the travel and everything about how compressed that season was would have some effect on their ability to deliver a good product. You made mention of having Graham Goodwin and Oliver Gavin in the booth. Derby, by Yas Marina, rather. There were times where they sounded tired, and I could 100% understand why.
Yep. And again, like, that's where it's like, if we're going to critique, we'll go there, but then at the same time, keeping in context where, I mean, not only are the drivers of teams exhausted, but I mean, I'm sure the whole behind the scenes crew in the admin side of just running this race for, just the stewards and, just the race staff themselves, including the broadcast crew.
And the media personnel, the organization personnel, I wrote something at the end of my last article, my last race report, that I think bears repeating right now. The Asian Le Mans Series managed to cram 16 hours of racing into 10 days in an extremely intense and compacted schedule, and it was only fitting that the most intense and compacted racing came right at the end. The fact that they managed to do that with people located around the world, with some people on site, with all of the complexities of managing a international motorsport series at that caliber in that sort of time frame, like, you have to take your hats off to them and give them a bit of leeway with a few things, like, the commentators being tired and things like that, because boy howdy, I was tired by the end of that season as well.
Yeah, and again, I think that's where everybody was at, and that's where you can definitely lean a little bit more into, having to be on it. But then that's where it kind of comes in where, like, you could definitely tell that people are tired, but it's hard for me because I've been in broadcast trucks, in production trucks for, national broadcast, in live sports, that kind of stuff. And I don't know how it works in this kind of setting and in the Asian Law Series, but those guys, when they're doing that, they're paying attention. They're looking at multiple feeds. They've got their support staff that are basically segueing between shots, calling up shots to be queued next. Like, there's a rhythm and style to this that it felt like it was one guy doing it, and he had no real context of like motorsport and stuff. So and that might not obviously be the case at all. And this might just be a case of everybody was maybe at home and nobody was actually in front of their together in the same room, nevertheless being at the track. So there might be that wrinkle to it. But just for how long that they would hold shots versus of cars just running by themselves, and Gigi and Ollie were not talking about that car at all, and they were not even talking about that class, and they just kept showing it. Whereas there was battles galore happening on other parts of the track was mildly infuriating. And I don't know if I don't know if I could explain that away as being everybody was tired, because it felt like that was the problem the entire time from race 1 to race 4.
I think the word they used is we had pictures without context sometimes, and that was the most frustrating part. And I don't really want to speculate as to why that is, because I'm sure that some people involved might end up listening to this, and I don't really want to be throwing anyone under the bus.
No, not at all.
But that is certainly an area to look at improving for next season, provided that circumstances don't change and we don't have a entire season within 2 weeks again. Yeah.
And again, like all of this is with the context that this is extremely extraordinary in terms of what they were able to try to like pull off, and they managed to do so. So, lessons for next time, and but at the same, I'm not going to. I'm not going to pound my fists real hard about this. It was as good of an effort as you can hope for with this pretty insanely condensed schedule that they had running.
It was as good as an effort as you could reasonably expect, and I'm happy with that. By the time the last race came around, they got their shit together. So, thank you for that.
Yes.
Final thoughts on the series as a whole. I think as an experiment, it worked. It worked well as a. I don't want to say as a last minute thing, because it wasn't ever a last minute thing. We knew about this before we knew what was going to happen to ELMS last season. So the fact that we were prepared for this as the product, and this as the product was delivered as expected, that's a pretty good that is exactly what you want from an ACO series. I thought the racing was good, performance was good, GT especially had a lot going for it. It was good.
I would totally agree with that. I mean, there's always going to be things that are lacking with this schedule in general. I mean, I think anybody that had half a brain would be able to immediately see like, oh man, this might be tough here, this might be tough there. But I think for how they managed to do it with the pretext of, COVID restrictions being a huge thing in Asia, and for a lot of the rounds that they would have probably wanted to go, and obviously them being able to just hop between countries is, almost not possible. The fact that they were able to kind of hold this still in a former round that they ran in previous years, and then at the same time being able to use a new track kind of to the ACO environment, I thought was a great compromise. And yeah, it was unique. And we've seen motorsport over the last year be forced in these positions to make unique decisions, and this was one of them. I think where I don't think we'll ever see this ever again, unless we're talking about this in a year from now that they're doing the same schedule. But I love that we now have a benchmark for how quickly can you start and then complete a championship, endurance championship, and actually have it work and not have it fall to pieces halfway through. So I thought it was a success for how insane really like some of this was. Like that was extremely tough for some of these drivers and teams. I can't imagine how much sleep that they lost throughout those 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, can you imagine finishing a race in darkness like 10:30, 11 p.m. after doing a 3 hour 7-minute stint to win the race, and then going, I have to do exactly the same thing in less than 24 hours time.
Yep.
Yeah,
and so unique, so unique. I mean, like I said, you won't see that ever again.
Absolutely. Do you want to quickly chat about Daytona, or should we wrap up?
Daytona. Well, I said we were in the last episode, so I feel like now I wasn't even playing. I was going to listen to this, and I'm going to listen to myself talk about it. But Daytona 24 Hours happened a month and a half ago, I guess now, and the first win for Acura, who won in the overall race for Wayne Taylor Racing, who continues to essentially pull out all of the rabbit's feet and throw them on track simultaneously so that his cars win. And crazy to see that be a intense battle all the way to the end, in which we had a tire puncture essentially decide the winner, because the Cadillac, who probably should have won, and again, how crazy good that Cadillac is at Daytona, with not Wayne Taylor Racing, but Chip Ganassi Racing, having that puncture late. And what a redemption arc that would have been for Edgar Van de Zande, being basically racing up against his old team, and just came up short with that, finishing 5th. But Acura gets their first Daytona 24 win in ever, I think. I don't remember if they've ever won that before. And Wayne Taylor continues his streak of madness. Yeah. Also, ERA Motorsport won LMP2. With some of the drivers, that were
in this series,
unbelievably slow. Yep, in Asian Le Mans Series 2. So
the slowest driver in the P2 field won the race.
As it should be. That it felt very much Le Mans prototype challenge, and I desperately missed that class. So and then Corvette.
Do not.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, just for the wild card, man.
Okay. You're all
I'm bringing the wildcard theme back. Yeah, Corvette Racing winning GTLM, BMW kind of being out in the field, and then Reezy, valiantly being there, and
Porsche getting killed before the race even bloody started.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure what happened, and the only thing I can assume is that the Corvettes were just a little bit slow, and everybody somehow was watching them behind them and decided to jump. And it was weird because it almost looked like there was like somebody that was on, like race control was on the radio being like, okay, green. Then for some reason the Corvettes were like a half a second delayed with that call, because basically everybody fanned out, including the GTD field. And it essentially, I guess, led to the BMW just driving through the back of the Porsche for some reason.
Oh my God.
And really ruining that potential
royally
that Porsche could have given Corvette. Yeah. Anybody who is a Porsche fan or just even a fan of that class is just like, oh, well, half of the class just got, annihilated.
Before the race even started. We have 24 hours of this.
Yep. Yep. And then the LMP3s surviving 24 hours, but finishing behind the GTLM field is kind of what I expected. But glad that they were able to finish. We had like a bunch of safety cars from all different classes, essentially. And then the GTD field being really, really good. I would say that was very, very good in terms of BOP. You had multiple overtakes. You had multiple teams that were leading for good stints that you could absolutely say were going to potentially win the race. And it ultimately ended up winning by one of the Mercedes taking 1-2 with Windward Racing. So, I would say that's probably one of the better GTD races that we had, besides, 2014, 2015, where we had that like last lap, overtakes and penalties and stuff that were issued there. Yeah. But yeah, overall, I think that was a solid Daytona 24. And then this being third year attending, I wasn't able to stay for all 24, but it was great to at least be at the track and then just to see the evolution of kind of the COVID response from earlier last year in mid-July when they first hosted that 2-hour race to kind of get the IMSA series started back up again, versus now in terms of what they were not allowing, what they were allowing. So, but we're getting there. Nice. And it was just good to be able to go there and support the series and to see really honestly a good quality race.
Nice. Thank you for that little brief sojourn into the Daytona 24. We probably should have done a proper full review, but life is hard and busy and long. as has this podcast.
Understandable.
As has been this podcast.
I knew it was going to be over 2 hours. I knew it was going to be over 2 hours.
It just keeps happening. Whenever you and I get together and chat, it's just like we just keep talking at each other. It's great.
Yeah, it's good bands.
Love it. Is there any more that we want to chat about, or is this time to say goodbye?
I feel like we could have talked about some of the auto invites and kind of the Le Mans debuts for some of these teams, but I feel like when we get that entry list coming in, especially with the calendar changes that are now in effect for this year for WC and Le Mans, it might be best to maybe save those for a little bit, wait, especially when we get the entry list coming out here soon.
That sounds like a great idea. So on that note, we'll say goodbye. Thank you very, very much for listening. Thank you for joining me, Austin.
Thank you, Michael, for letting me come here.
No problems. Thank you to the RacingLine.app for sponsoring us and keeping us on the airwaves. I mean, we'd be on the airwaves anyway, but now that all it costs us is our priceless time and effort. I mean, yeah.
Well, now and sleep schedule, because I had to turn off notifications after the first race because I was like at 4 a.m. But hey, like now I'm getting notifications for when race starts are. So like I will take that every day.
Ah, brilliant. Love to hear it. Well done. Anything to ruin your sleep schedule, Cookie.
Oh, it gets ruined anyway, but I'd rather it be for sports car racing than anything else.
This is true. Of all the reasons to ruin your sleep schedule, sports car racing is one of the best ones. And we hope that you ruin your sleep schedule with all the racing that's going to happen coming up shortly with what's starting soon? IMSA's back soon, right? 12 Hours of Sebring.
Yeah, we got 12 Hours of Sebring coming up, and then we would have had WC and ELMS coming up after that, but those got pushed. So we're going to have a little bit of a quiet time of just being very attentive to IMSA's races and calendar schedule at the beginning of this year for sure.
Oh joy, I can't wait for it.
You are so excited.
I'll probably watch. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. That's it. That's all we got. Bye. Goodbye. I'm Floodman11. Thank you for listening. Peace out.
Yo, 1-0 Gazoo.